Bearded Man here, and I've got Kyle, who is connected in
Hello.
some way, shape, or form to Amber. So Kyle,
Just
thank
happen
you.
to know her.
Huh?
I just happen to know her. But no, we're together.
Yeah, yeah. So, Kyle, you wanted to share your deconversion story with everyone that's online, and yeah, I love to hear these stories. They're always interesting, and sometimes they're very sad, sometimes they're not, and everybody has a story. And even people that have always been an atheist have a unique story to tell. So let's start with your family upbringing as far as religion goes. If what religion, if any, did your parents have separately together, and what was that like?
They grew up in Texas and I was born in Texas. I was born in a town called Greenville, which is about 50 miles or so east northeast of Dallas. My mom grew up in a town about 30 miles of there. My dad grew up in Dallas. My mom was churched all of her life in the denomination she's from was Missionary Baptist, which is almost 100% the same as Southern Baptist, but with a few maybe business differences, I guess. My dad, on his own, went to church as a child. Funny thing is, as a young child, until I was maybe 17, we didn't go to church much at all. But if, when pressed, my mom would tell her what her beliefs were, and she always wished we as a family did. Then just after or just before the end of my junior year of high school, my grandmother suddenly died in my house while they were visiting. And somehow that prompted my mom and dad to say, we're going to start going to church all the time now, which that one actually stuck. We went to a Southern Baptist church in the Denver area where I'm from where I still live. That church was made up largely of people transplanted from Texas or the other parts of the South, and they were largely upper middle class or higher on the economic scale and almost exclusively white. Then, about maybe a couple months before graduating high school, I got quote unquote saved, the, the quote unquote accepting Jesus into your heart and all that. So that was my young life.
Yeah,
Then going in, go ahead.
yeah. I was gonna say let's talk about that a little bit. Did you was it kind of like an altar call sort of thing, or
Oh
did
yeah,
it
they
was
were. Where
okay?
at the end of the pastor's sermon, if you want to do that or just become officially a member of that congregation, you walk forward down the aisle to the front, and then you are there in front of the entire congregation and with the pastor who's saying this is Kyle or whoever, and he has accepted Jesus or wants to be a member, etc.
Was that something that you wanted to do, or that you felt pressured to do?
Let's just say I felt internally compelled. That
Mm,
there, I'm sure there was pressure there because
yeah,
it,
social pressure
it's
to
all
some
pervasive.
extent.
But some one morning, some Sunday morning, I just woke up and found I need to do this, and then I went down, walking down, and I was actually sweating profusely. But that's just what I do sometimes when there's a big event.
Yeah, I mean, getting up in front of a crowd is nerve wracking, and that's part of the religion thing. You're
Yeah.
declaring this thing, and you're gonna have feelings, big feelings during that. So that people confuse that for spirituality is understandable. Did you
One
have?
thing that
Okay, sorry.
I'm sorry. One thing, a little bit of background to that. In my school age, especially junior high, I was I was a prime target for harassment, bullying, what have you, because I'm autistic, and that word wasn't used all that much. But if you're autistic and people may not have the language for it, they know you're weird or off or whatever term they want to use. And then so I didn't have all that much of a social life, all the way into high school. So then joining that church, then I finally had a ready-made social life and a group of peers that I could hang out with when it was planned, what have you.
Yeah, the social aspect of church, especially for youth group, can be very important. I've very fond memories of youth group. I've thankfully no negative memories really of church in general. Um, did you get baptized publicly, or was that a thing that they did? Or
Yes, uh, Southern Baptists.
I mean, yeah, that's in the
Yeah,
name, right? Yeah.
yeah.
Was
It's not a sprinkling. You don't have a little
no, you
few
got to get
droplets of
fully
wine.
dunked. Yeah, with a
Yeah,
big bathtub at the front there.
yeah. I had to, take off my Sunday clothes and put on some robe, and then go into this little, uh, I don't know what to call it, a Baptist kiddie pool that's about like a foot, and then they take me and they dunk me and then bring me back up. And so one aspect of that I'm going to go over, there's a denomination, like the conservative version of the Church of Christ actually believes that you must do that ritual
Right.
or you don't
Yes.
get into
Yes.
heaven. Southern Baptists aren't quite like that. They just highly encourage that you be baptism as a quote unquote as a public witness.
Right, right. Yeah, the Church of Christ has it that you must be baptized in full immersion or it doesn't count. And then some add that it has to, you have to have it said the right way, that it can't be in the name of Jesus and it's got to be this and that or whatever
Right.
it's got to be a specific phrasing because God is very picky apparently. So this was somewhat, that you've been exposed to this religion, your whole life, so to speak, and it's kind of a social thing that you're doing, and there's maybe some social pressure and your own feeling of like, okay, it's time for me to join this. And uh, did you pray a lot and read the Bible a lot when you weren't at
Oh,
church, or was it just a Sunday sort of was the only day that you paid attention to God? What was that like?
well, how do I put this? Of course, after the quote unquote getting saved, just a few months later, I was starting college, and then it was a local community college. And at that time, once a week, I would meet with a director of a club that was for Southern Baptist students, and he covered basically the Denver area. And we did one-on-one Bible study, and I did it just more or less. I mean, I ended up kind of, I don't know if you want to call it Stockholm syndrome, but call it what you want. But I ended up just going along with it and being okay with it. But as far as like on the day-to-day part, I'd have my gaps, but then I remind myself, oh, I need to pray, I need to read my Bible. Then I went to the larger state university, and that was still going on. Like, oh, I need to pray, I need to read my Bible. And at that state university, I had a really good group of friends there, and I kind of was a little bit more outspoken in my beliefs, like at least in there, and then sometimes out on the campus, so to speak. I was even involved with my beliefs got more right wing over the years too. During that time, and I was involved with college Republicans, and that's something I would not recommend that anybody do, but I did. But
Yeah, the there is some odd intersection of politics and religion at times. I remember there was this one kid that happened to be a Democrat. We were like, oh, but none of us. We're all kids. We
yeah,
didn't know what anything was, so it didn't really.
yeah,
It was just like, okay,
no,
we're
no,
middle class, so that's what we're going to be as Republican, I guess. I
yeah.
don't know.
Yeah, well, I was at Colorado State University in
Yeah,
northern part of the state of Fort Collins at the time. Um, one the things that kind of stick out to me during that time sometimes were the cultural manifestations of it, and sometimes in the bumper stickers, and then just the offhand things that people would say. I remember distinctly at a retreat at a place near Colorado Springs, kind of a rustic camp for Southern Baptists. I met a guy there who was working at a grocery store, That store was unionized, but what he told me was that he refused to join it. Why? Because to join a union meant that you were not sufficiently submissive to your boss's authority as the scripture commanded you to be. I'm not even joking.
Yeah, I mean, you get some weird ideas sometimes from religion, you know. Um, but now you're in college, okay? So kind of are you away from home, in a dorm, or are you still at home at this time?
First year, I was in a dorm. It was not a Christian dorm, it was the campus dorm, but I wanted to be at a non alcoholic dorm just because, even to this day, I don't like to be around a bunch of drunk people. I've just always been that way, and that worked out okay for me. 2 years, the next couple years after that, I lived for one semester. I lived in the Baptist group little house in the basement there. For the rest of the time, it was in an apartment or a basement house with somebody. But Colorado State was maybe 50, 60 miles from home. So I could always come home on a weekend when I wanted to. And I did fairly often enough.
So now that you were on your own, did you still attend church on your own initiative?
Yes, I did, because I was getting more, at least for whatever reason, I was still dedicated to it. And as far as like that, the cultural manifestations talk I was talking about earlier, it's in the bumper stickers. Like one said, when the Bible speaks, the argument is over. The other, which is a little bit more common, it first said, God said it. I believe it. That settles it. It then just became God said it. That settles it. So the dogmatism was strong.
Yeah, I've heard that phrase and seen it. I was in Colorado Springs a while. I don't recall any bumper stickers really, but I was there at a later date than you might have been, but or different. You might have been different area of the state, or maybe I just didn't notice. Who knows? Uh,
It was more like to see them more like on a like at that retreat center on the
yeah,
wall
right,
in
right,
the
right.
kitchen area than on a car.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But Colorado, yeah, I had a lot of fun in Colorado. But yeah, there was a lot of churches in that area. So it's not as much as maybe around here in the now I'm in South Carolina. It's like you could throw a rock, you'll hit a church, kind of thing.
Yeah, Colorado
Uh,
Springs is where Focus on the Family is headquartered,
oh, okay. Yeah, I didn't know that.
and the U.S. Air Force Academy is just outside of it there, and there is a very strong evangelical presence within that academy.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's a very red voting district, that area too.
Right. Yeah, I do remember that being the case for whatever reason that Colorado was that way. So definitely, I would say that religion, that God belief, was very much a part of your now moving into adult life. Even as a child, now you're an adult, and there. So what? Something occurred, or a number of things must occur to lead you to the path of deconversion. So what was the start of that, if there is a start? Or
How do I go with this? Like around the time when I was finally not attending college anymore, it was like around 1993, 1994. Um, my religious beliefs were getting more stern or steadfast, whatever term you want to use. But in my autism and ADHD, maybe that's part of it. I found the ritualistic parts of it, the prayer and Bible reading and stuff, kind of tedious and boring, I guess. But I found the right wing activism pretty captivating and exciting. So I got into that some. There's a guy from the Denver area who's not around anymore that some of the people in chat and who might frequent your channel, and you may know of him, that I told you about, named Bob Enyart. I don't know if you've heard of him or not, other
no, I
than my
looked
mention
I,
of him.
I looked him up, but I didn't find him to be familiar at all. So
Yeah, well, he did. every once in a while he would appear on Bill Maher's old politically incorrect show that ran in the late 90s and early 2000s. But those who know about him may know more about him being extreme anti-COVID safety measure guy, and he ended up dying from it.
Oh, okay. Well,
The
that's kind
one that,
of an ironic sort of twist, isn't it?
yeah, the Bob Enyart I remember was from the 1990s when he had a local cable access TV show, and it ended up being a more polished show over the years. It ended up going on like a short wave and then internet radio show. But there's the whole saying the quiet part out loud that people talk about nowadays that some bad actors are doing now. Then there's Bob Enyart, who is like, Christians shouldn't have any quiet parts. It should be out loud all the time in every situation. And on his cable access show, he would he would with glee personally attack those who would not agree with him. He would call them all kinds of names, tell them they're going to hell, etc. And he had little sayings that were just the I don't have receipts that I can find and show, but I can't unsee and unhear what I saw and heard. And at the time, I was like, oh, well, that's just what God wants us to do. But there might have been a small part of me, some of those like, I'm not sure that this is the right way to go, but it was just the tug of the activism just kept me there for whatever reason. Also, though, someone who I won't mention, but let's just say a very close relative came out to me as gay when I was way immersed into that.
Hmm.
And that created a sort of cognitive dissonance that stayed within me for a few years. And I was even doing things like being at the front row of a Pat Buchanan rally a couple years later that, of course, I wouldn't dream of doing now, but I did back then. It required a lot of mental gymnastics on my part to convince myself that I was not involved in something racist, sexist, homophobic, what have you, but I was there.
Hmm.
But then maybe a couple years later is when I finally got a place of my own. I was working the grocery store and I finally got enough will and overcame enough executive function to do that. Then part of it just dawned on me, that just shy of being 30 years old is when I finally came to me. I guess the emotional satisfaction of doing all that started to dissipate. And it came to me that one thing that is really toxic from evangelical Christianity is their approach to sexuality, whatever, in so many ways. Like, I wasn't directly affected in the same way that, let's say, young girls might be, or if God forbid you were LGBTQ plus, but I'm not going to say that it didn't affect me, because there's the strictures, they do apply to the men in a certain way too, even with all the double standards.
Hmm. So you were kind of seeing a disconnect between this the love that Jesus supposedly preached, and yet it's like this and that is sin, 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 sin. How terrible, and Jesus doesn't talk that way. He hangs out with the sinners, so the people that are following Christ aren't really behaving like Christ. So that's gonna definitely cause some cognitive dissonance, if nothing else.
Like,
Uh,
the weird thing about that is that the Old Testament, the one portrays the wrathful, petty, cruel God, actually has quite a bit of passages about taking care of the poor and needy, and not implementing usurious lending systems. And there's no mention of hell in the Old Testament, but there is in the New Testament and the Gospels. And yeah, Jesus was did hang around the sinners. That there was still, yeah, that disconnect. But I there were two churches I attended, both from my 17-year-old self all the way until I stopped being Christian. One of them was that first one I mentioned. The second one was kind of a borderline mega church, and its location was right across the street from the old Mile High Stadium where the Denver Broncos played. But at that church, I remember one sermon where I guess the topic was prayer, but in that the pastor, one thing he said was, if I become a little too self-sufficient, God knows how to custom fit a crisis into my life. And this is someone preaching both the Old and New Testament. And that's just one of those quotes that I cannot shake or unsee. But it just showed me how evangelical Christianity worships a very controlling, abusive, and petty God.
Yeah,
And
it's like you're not allowed to have too much success, or if you are successful, then it's, it's all God and not you. And it's like, look, I mean, give yourself some credit. I mean, come on.
yeah,
But
in the yeah, and in the first church I attended, one another quote that stuck out to me from that pastor was when he said, "When you come to Christ, you give up all of your rights, including the right to be yourself." And what I take away from that as a neurodivergent person is evangelical Christianity expects us, including those of us who are neurodivergent, to perform being neurotypical, even though they don't use the language. That's the harm they do. And there's not enough conversation about that in Christian churches.
yeah, well, religion seems to have evolved to take advantage of our psychological nature, either deliberately or accidentally. Who doesn't matter. Regardless, it certainly has hooks, mental hooks that try to get people in and keep them in, and keep them believing because without the belief, then the religion dies. Without believers,
Oh yeah.
there's no God
Oh
once there's no believers.
yeah.
So
Oh, they will admit, they will say openly that God wants you to be at a weak point so that he can work through you. He can't work in someone who's where everything is going okay. He wants you in those and that is why they really target people like those who just went through divorce or those who just went through a loss in the family or any type of stressful or sometimes traumatic situations. That is their target audience a lot of times.
yeah, and of course the AA also kind of has those Christian overtones, and thankfully there is a secular version of AA. I forget what it's called. I think it's maybe
Right,
SA or something. I don't know, but you know, uh, it's like I think they've some versions of AA have moved more away from the classical thing because
right.
they're but yeah. So with all this kind of recognition on your part that the followers of Christ weren't being very Christ-like, that was causing you to then doubt the faith. Do I have that right? Or
That was some of it. I mean, in the times that I from like 1994 when I was done with college until I basically pretty much cold turkey quit evangelical Christianity. So maybe a 5-year window, I was involved in singles groups, and I there were plenty of good, enjoyable times there. Did all kinds of activities just on our own. Like we go out to a restaurant after church and just eat and socialize, or we'd do things like I went whitewater rafting a couple times. We go bowling. We go to a movie. We'd have game night. We'd go to a gym, like a gym in the church, and play volleyball. And went on we went on retreats and things like that. Of course, we did some of the serious religious stuff, but I mean, if you I'm
yeah,
sure if you meet the average evangelical Christian one on one, you'll get probably a very engaging, warm, and
yeah,
person, and sometimes they'll show their kindness and caring. But yeah, overall of that is the a very toxic belief system. So that's why it is more about the system to me than it is about any individual person. And it's not to infantilize the persons who are involved in that. Like if take ownership and responsibility for what you believe, but know that in the end it is a whole system we have to dismantle, and it takes a lot of work both on the micro and the macro level.
So what was it, if anything? So you kind of broadly, that, but anything specific that was causing you to doubt or lose faith, or however you want to put that.
That's always been a little bit hard for me to pin down. I think it's just over time, back to the fact that the emotional satisfaction from any of it was just starting to dissipate. But I guess just seeing the church's unhealthy approach toward to sexuality and romance kind of was, I that's one thing I could point to as a catalyst. During that time, towards the end, we were, if you're familiar with the Joshua Harris book, I Kissed Dating Goodbye, and he happened to disavow that years later. But we were heavily into that. My singles group was where it was, you don't date people that isn't biblical because that can lead to all kinds of sin. You need to do courtship where there's lots of micromanaging from other people and supervision, like even if you're single. And it was just, I guess
Very,
maybe
very
the weight of that got a
unfun.
bit overbearing.
Yeah, very unfun way to try to date somebody, do the
Right?
courtship rituals and whatnot.
Here's the
Yeah.
weird thing. Yeah, a weird thing is, like, I had during all my in my 20s, before I met my current like current wife who I'm still married to, in my 20s I had maybe 3 or 4 dating relationships, and zero of them were with the born agains. They were all with people outside of that fold. And it was taught in that church, do not be unequally yoked with a
I was gonna
non-believer.
say,
But that's what I did.
you were in trouble. Oh,
Yeah. I
yeah,
wasn't
that's.
really in trouble, but I kind of, it was kind of papered over, I guess. But then I think that's the point where I just kind of thought, I just can't do this anymore. I don't,
Mm,
and then so maybe around summer of 1999, where I just stopped attending. And
mm,
it just so happened that about a month after that, I met my current wife at a bar, and she's a very kind and caring person. We're not really romantically involved anymore, but we're still very good friends. But after I met her, it there's going to be a time where I would need to tell my parents, "Hey, I'm seeing this person," and that first happened in a phone conversation with my mom, and she asked, "Does she know that you're a Christian?"
mm,
And I'm a very poor liar. I'm not good at it at all. So
mm.
I had to tell her, "I'm sorry, mom, but I don't believe all this anymore." And that was the end of that phone conversation. She kind of, in a very, I don't know, dour tone, says, "Well, I sorry you feel that way." And then that
Yeah.
right up, that was pretty much the end of the phone conversation. A few days later, I happened to be over at their house because I was mowing their yard. But then my dad was there, and he was kind of giving his, not yelling, but very firm and certain way of saying that you're not following God the way you're supposed to. And if you're one of his children, he's going to chasten you. But what I'm afraid of is that you're not, and that's going to be the worst thing. They kind of, they did accept mine and my wife's relationship, but there was kind of this cloud hanging over that Kyle is marrying a non-believer,
Mm.
and people may find out who I am in this video, but it's what it is.
Yeah, and also, you don't believe anymore, and so, it's so, when we think about it, our parents love us unconditionally. It's kind of programmed into our genetics that we act this way, and here comes religion to mess with that natural function and kind of
You are hitting something very pertinent there. I mean, my mom and dad were raised up in authoritarian belief structures, and they kind of carried that on in their own ways. They also knew how to, and much if and most of the time did practice kindness and warmth and all that. It's just the belief structure that they were in, which also meant right wing politics, really dampened and robbed them of the ability to fully show the ways of love and community that you would hope that people would do that would allow humans to flourish in the right way.
Well, they didn't disown you or anything like that, though, did they? Or
No, they never did.
okay, well that's good. Because I've heard stories like that where parents disown their kids because of deconversion, and so at least they
Yeah,
didn't go that far. So it could have been a lot worse. I mean, it's still bad. You know.
yeah. I
Uh,
mean, yeah. There's no oppression Olympics here, no
yeah,
suffering
right, right.
Olympics
It's
here.
like yeah,
My
yeah. It's like yeah, it could be worse, right? It's like that
yeah,
never helps, right? No,
yeah.
but
That
you're
never.
you're
And yeah,
you're
what I
you're
went through wasn't nearly as bad, but
no, but
it was
still,
still
it's
not as
bad.
bad.
It doesn't matter. It's bad. It doesn't matter what level, or even if we can quantify levels
Right.
or should. But uh, yeah, so you kind of just saw the hypocrisy, if you will, of the belief system not matching how the people are, and just this is you stopped going to church and you also stopped believing at the same time, or did the stop and then the non-belief come later?
Well, to go back to what I saw the hypocrisy. I think more to the point for me is I saw the harm
Mm,
that was
yeah,
being
okay.
done.
The harm was
And
more, of course. Yeah, the harm is.
yeah,
Yeah, because
because
especially you're told one thing about the religion, that it's supposed to be loving and kind and helpful and build people up and redeem sinners and all this thing, and but yet it's doing harm. So it's not doing what it says it's supposed to be doing.
yeah,
So something
yeah,
something
yeah,
went
because
wrong there.
yeah, there's hypocrisy in all of us. And,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Now that doesn't
but
necessarily mean, of course, the ideas are untrue. It means that people are screwing them up. So
yeah, and it doesn't
so
mean we shouldn't be mindful of hypocrisy, and we should be okay with egregious examples of it. But just
right,
know that
right.
we're imperfect beings, imperfectly living out our lives in an imperfect system that we did not choose to be born into.
Yeah,
But
definitely, definitely. Um, so now was there a time, a period after you were now deconverted, or whatever label you want to have there, that you had any sort of crisis, existential worry about mortality or afterlife, or anything like that, or
after I quit going to church pretty much cold turkey, I still kind of had a generic God belief, like kind of like there has to be something out there because insert whatever logical fallacy you want to here. But over time, that went away. And I would, if I had to guess, probably 8 to 10 years after that was when I realized I don't believe in any deities. Like, I don't, there really is no God. I can call myself atheist.
hmm, took a
And
while.
that was a process in and of itself.
Was
But
there any sort
also,
of negative feelings like regret or anger or anything like that, or was it kind of a smooth sail?
well, I'm still unpacking it all today, of course. And
Oh,
then sometimes I get angry, but it wasn't a smooth sail, but it wasn't, my life wasn't turned upside down because of it, because I had my wife and I still could have, decent times with my family. My relationship with my family was overall good.
yeah.
It,
You're
it,
still
it, it
you. You're at the end of
yeah,
the day, you're still you. You
yeah,
have,
yeah.
it's
The,
just
if there was if there's an internal crisis of belief, there was some. It didn't feel too rocky though, but
no.
there was some of it.
Uh, so now looking back, and you had good times, had bad times. You know, do you think if you had to weigh and say, was it positive, negative overall, or is it kind of a mixed bag, like in general, like is belief in God overall negative, or is it neutral, or is it the religion, or can we even really say what is the exact
Well,
problem? Can we nail down like what part of it's wrong?
if you know the phrase, your mileage may vary.
Right, right. Yeah,
Um, my experience is my own, and I can't really
Mm,
project that onto anybody else's experience.
mm,
And I'm sure there are people in evangelical Christianity who practice that faith and order their own lives accordingly, who don't get sucked into the aspects of it that cause them to want to take away rights from marginalized people,
mm,
and and they and they don't get into the boundary violations that come with trying to proselytize people. Just that they're still under underneath a belief system that on the whole, if you look at it on the whole, does harm, that
mm,
causes that does sometimes cause people, youth, to get kicked out of their homes because their sexuality is wrong, or their gender that they that they say they are, that they know they are, is quote unquote wrong, or because
mm.
they had sex outside of marriage, or because they ended up pregnant when not married, or what have you.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's
Well,
overall, I would like to see it go, but I don't care what someone believes personally.
mm.
Just it's just the harm is when you try to force it on others, especially through civil law.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'd agree with that. The beliefs can be pretty benign. It's the actions that are taken because of those beliefs that can, that
Yeah,
matter. Uh,
mostly, yeah. It, there's also the part that beliefs can inform actions, so that's
of
where we
course,
have to be
right,
careful.
right, yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, that's what some beliefs are benign, others are not. Obviously, believing it's so weird because in Christianity, you're taught that all sins are equal, but they don't act. Many of the, especially the evangels, will just go. For a while there was really anti-gay stuff for a long time. I think
And
that's
it's coming
kind of
back.
is it coming back? I thought it kind of died out for a while. I don't. I've been
Oh,
really
yeah, and it was. I guess it's
because
I
the
guess you're
Westro
lucky if
Baptist.
you're
I'm
not
thinking the
knowing that.
Westro Baptist Church kind of died out. So I guess that's what I'm
It's
thinking
more
of.
like with all the anti-trans fervor, it kind of ended up morphing into, you know, you shouldn't be gay, other than many, and it's in many more prominent conservative, right wing, and Christian nationalist circles. Like it's
Mm,
the the revival, the disapproval of gay marriage and everything,
mm.
and things like Project 2025. If you happen to come across it, you'll see it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That one was. I read that. That was just way too overreach. I mean, even I believe I could be. I'm pretty sure that even Trump was like, "Nah, I don't want anything to do with that thing." So, like,
Oh,
yeah,
he
I
has everything to do with it.
yeah, he's not supporting that either. Like nobody wants this thing. Like how bad
Oh,
is
of
it?
course.
Come on. So it's like even this guy's not for it. So it's kind of like when the Creation or Discovery Institute or whatever it is, they say hey look guys, the Earth is round. Don't say it's flat. So it's like the flat earthers like they're like it's like even those guys won't go that far. So
Yeah.
there's a
What?
line that people won't cross, and
Yeah, I
figuring
think
that out.
what needs to be said is that any individual evangelical Christian may not sound like Greg Locke necessarily.
Mm,
However, if you vote for someone who will push for legislation that takes away my rights or your rights or another person's rights, or
that's not good.
if you don't, as they say, collect your people, if you're not confronting the people in your circles about pushing these toxic things, I'm sorry, but you're also part of the problem.
Mm. So yeah, so you primarily focus on TikTok. You don't have anything on YouTube yet. Maybe you will. Maybe you won't. What are you doing on? What's your focus on TikTok? What do you do there?
When I post a video, it just happens to be more things that, if I find a tweet or a post from somebody that's in meme form, I'll share it and make a video out of it, and then add my own caption, and it gets its comments. I've made a couple on autism because I'm autistic, and that's just a thing that I focus on. you've kind of prompted me that I want to maybe start doing some videos about deconversion, about little snippets of it. I if those of you who know me or watching, hold me to this, please. I want to post this. It helped me overcome my executive function because that message needs to get out there that if you're in that system and you're wanting to get out, just be able to pull a thread and that can begin and hopefully you can find a safe place to land.
Yeah, and there's of course Recovery from Religion is an organization that's out there that people can try to hook up with. And as far as sharing deconversion stories, I know I want to say Neil, the 604 atheist, I want to say, does that like all the time. He that's like his thing that he loves to do. And I was, I've been on there. Everybody's been on there that so our the religious conversion stories are out there, and so having the deconversion stories out there, I think, is important. And there are the differences are striking. Sometimes they're intellectual, and sometimes they're emotional, and sometimes they're a combination thereof.
Yep.
And I would prefer if people converted or deconverted for intellectual reasons only, but that's not how humans are. So uh
Yes.
I don't think that, I think that, you know, we don't want necessarily people to deconvert per se, but definitely don't want people to harm others or inflict harm on others with their beliefs or lack of beliefs. And it's hard to navigate how to do that right.
Yeah.
But we're going to try, and
Yeah.
hopefully we succeed at that. Well,
Yeah. I mean,
Kyle, oh, sorry.
yeah. Oh, no, no worries.
That's right.
Evangelical Christianity is very anti-critical thinking, so
Mm.
much so that in one article, I remember reading one of the writers said that there are certain unchanging truths, and these truths have authority over us, which is probably the most anti-critical thinking statement that I've ever heard. But if even it's not so much stop following this religion as it's okay to examine what you believe and try to figure out why you believe it and have that process, have that conversation with yourself. It's okay to have those doubts and those questions, and it is okay if you end up believing something else over time. It's not the end of the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's I think an important message for people to hear. Always be willing to question whatever you hold most dear, especially what you hold most dear. Those are the things we must question even more because we hold the most dear. If we don't constantly subject our ideas to critical examination, well, those are the ideas that might wind up not being true. And I'd rather
Right.
have, maybe I don't have the truth, and I want the truth when it's out there to find and discover. And doing that's something we can help each other to do. And
That goes for me as a guy who is just shy of 55 years old, 25 years after I quit going to church. I still need to interrogate and examine the things I believe and wonder is, am I still subject to certain biases? Oh, you bet I am.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Kyle, I think that you have a positive energy and message to give to people, and I thank you for your time and energy and sharing your deconversion story. And I'll leave the final words to you before I hit the button, and we'll close this out. So go ahead, Neil. Or
Uh,
Neil, sorry.
Kind of my message is that you did not enter this world broken, wretched, sinful, whatever. Strive to be the best version of yourself that you can be, but once you get past that, you're just okay as you are. You're beautiful and lovely exactly as you are. And lead with love because people really don't care what you know until they know how much you care.
Okay. Thank you so much, Kyle. All right. Bye, everybody. I'm pressing the
Bye.
button.
Thank you for having me. Bye.